Dear Father Abbot, dear friends, we will start a few minutes earlier because of length of the Abbot's lecture. I will just try to introduce Abbot with short biography, and after that I will ask him to say a few words about his lecture, and young gentleman Philip, who is a student here in Cambridge, is going to help us with Abbot's lecture. Father Archimandrite Methodios was born in Georgia on Christmas Day, on 7th of January 1970. In Serbia at that time it was Yugoslavia. He studied electronical engineering in Georgia and Belgrade. He came to Mount Athos in the beginning of the 1994 and was tonsured a monk in 1955 on the feast of the Transfiguration. The Hilandar Monastery Brotherhood elected him abbot on the Saturday of Mir Hermes in 2010, and since that he is abbot of the Serbian Imperial Monastery of Hilandar. I will ask Father Methodios to introduce us in his lecture.
Se vas biotate, Holy Fathers, dear friends. First of all, I wish to thank you for the invitation to address this illustrious gathering. Since the monastic tradition is based on the New Testament, any monk expounding his view, as the title of my talk suggests, is obliged to begin from the evangelical teaching. This is what we shall try to do at the opening of this talk, to continue by an attempt to explain the difference in meaning between two Serbian words for hospitality, gostoprimstvo and gostoljublje, with the idea to show that gostoljublje in the spiritual sense marks a higher form of hospitality. Word gostoljublje or philoxenia in Greek, gostoljublje is from two words. Gost is a guest or a stranger in English, and ljublje is from word ljubav, it means love. Gostoljublje is when we show love for our guests. We shall go on by touching upon hospitality in monastic tradition generally in order to proceed to Atonite theory and practice, as well as to the way in which hospitality is understood in our holy monastery of Hilandar. Following the example of the householder from the Gospel according to St. Matthew, who bringed forth out of his treasure things new and old, we tried to include a number of old and contemporary examples. It was particularly precious for us to have been able to use the reflections on the subject of hospitality, which we found in the legacy of Metropolitan Callistos of blessed memory, to whom this conference is dedicated. The full text of our talk proved to be too long for this occasion, so that you shall be presented by a shorter version, hoping that the complete one would be considered for publishing at a later date. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Professor Vladeta Jankovic, an old friend of Hilandar and one of FOMA's patrons, for the English translation of this talk. As it must be obvious to you, my command of English is not on a level required by an occasion like this, so that I shall ask young Mr. Filip Bošković of St. John's College in Cambridge to kindly read what we, with good Lord's help, have written for this gathering.
Hospitality is a virtue which, like all other Christian virtues, has its origins in Holy Scripture. Hospitality is founded on love towards one's neighbor, the second of the two greatest commandments of our Lord Jesus Christ, which states, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." In the Serbian language, for the term hospitality, there are two words, gostoprimstvo and gostoljublje. As far as we know, such a distinction does not exist in English, French, or Greek. However, there is a noticeable difference in some other languages. For example, in German, die gaster bercham and die gaster preusciar. In Italian, ospitalita and ospitovalezza. And in Russian, gostoprimstvo and radushie. In our opinion, there is an important difference between hospitality as an act of receiving someone, and hospitality as love shown towards the one being received or the love of being hospitable. Hospitality as an act of receiving someone can be considered an evangelistic commandment, by fulfilling which we perform a spiritual exercise. Depending on the level of accompanying zeal and following a period of time, through the action of God's grace, we obtain the virtue of love, which has in one of its manifestations this very thing, hospitality. It is our sincere conviction that the difference in meaning between the words gostoprimstvo and gostoljublje marks this decisive step which divides duty from virtue. Considering this issue through the witness of Christian asceticism and virtuous living, we can conclude that the offering hospitality coincides with the God's commandment of love of one's neighbor. Through struggling and perfecting ourselves in this virtue, we become hospitable. Our efforts in fulfilling the commandment of hospitality lead us to acquisition of the higher virtue, which is love. Gaining the various fruits of virtues through exploits and in accordance with our God-given gifts applies not only to all Christians, but also to all monastics. And for better understanding, we will quote an example from the lives of the Holy Fathers. One monk from Afar came to visit the virtuous elder Arsenius the Great, desiring to gain spiritual benefit. However, the elder, from the moment of the first encounter, was silent and gazed at the ground praying. After this, our traveling monk went on to visit the second and highly esteemed ascetic, Moses the Black, who warmly greeted him and lovingly offered hospitality. When asked by another monk which of the two great ascetics appeared to be more perfect, the monk traveler answered, "He who showed me proper hospitality." Having heard of this, one of the fathers in the skit desired through prayer to understand which of the two great ascetics was more perfect and more worthy of praise from God. In answer to his prayer, he saw in a vision two boats floating in the river. The one in which Venerable Arsenius sat was being steered and led by the Spirit of God. The second boat, in which Venerable Moses sat, was being accompanied by a group of holy angels. From this vision, it was revealed that both were holy men, and as in both were securely floating towards their goal, deification and eternal life in the heavenly kingdom. However, with differing approaches in accordance with the gifts given by their Creator, Venerable Arsenius had the gifts of hesychia and prayer, and in this way he served his neighbor, praying for the whole world, whereas Venerable Moses served his neighbor through the love of being hospitable. Therefore, as we are commanded by the Apostle Peter, every man hath received a gift, even so minister the same one to another. In continuation of our talk, we will use both words, hospitality and the love of being hospitable, even though both suggest the same virtue, in order to make clear the difference in stages of progress within this virtue.
Now we will hear about hospitality in monastic rules and tradition generally.
When monastic statutes are concerned, one should be aware that they are based on the gospel and that they help monks to practically apply the teachings of the gospel in their lives. Bearing this in mind, it's understandable why there is a need for hospitality to be further defined in monastic communities through statutes and rules, even though it originates from Christian science. This is necessary in order that the monks who do this exercise may perform it in a manner which will help them in striving towards perfection, on the one hand, and on the other hand as a precaution, namely to prevent them from overstepping the measure of treatment of or excessive closeness to the visitors, which may harm their souls. Rules on offering hospitality have always been a part of monastic statutes. They commonly regulate the manner of welcoming visitors, the duration of their stay, and what they should pay attention to while staying at the monastery, regarding their behavior and communication with monks. In the 4th century rule of Saint Benedict, chapter 53, among other points, it is stated that all guests who arrive should be received as if they were Christ. And let due honor be shown to all. The superior shall break his fact for the sake of a guest, if it is necessary. When receiving the poor and pilgrims, the greatest care and kindness should be shown, because it's especially in welcoming them that Christ is received. Responsibility for the guest house also shall be assigned to a holy monk. In addition to the fact that monastic typica referred to hospitality from the earliest centuries, it was also common for great elders who initially gathered monastic communities and established monasteries to place emphasis on hospitality. Thus, at the end of their lives, when leaving a legacy to their spiritual children on how to continue their own lives, these elders pointed to philoxeny as one of the most important virtues. For instance, Venerable Euthymius left a commandment to his disciples before his death that the monastery door should never be closed to those who arrive, but must remain always open for guests whom monks should accept under their roof and share with them everything they have, so that God's blessing could always rest with them. Despite being aligned with the condition of today's life by necessity, typical of contemporary monasteries have their cue from ancient monastic statutes in the same monastic spirit. In this respect, the typicon of the great female monastery of the Annunciation in Ormilia states the following: hosting visitors is practiced with simplicity and love. Hospitality of priests and monks is performed carefully and piously, especially with regard to male guests, separately, carefully, and in chastity. Hosting women, though, should be performed with piety, love, and simplicity. Acquaintances of the sisterhood are accommodated in guest rooms and they participate in divine services, and the Mother Superior is informed about them. St. Anthony's Monastery in Arizona, United States, whose founder is Elder Ephraim, a former abbot of Hilandar Monastery on Mount Athos, has the following note in its typicon: it is very important for the visitors to understand that the monastery is not a place for vacation or entertainment, but a place of pilgrim, prayer, and focus on spiritual life. It is with great joy that we offer hospitality to devout pilgrims who wish to participate in spiritual and liturgical life of the monastery. There follow general notes on what is expected from the guests. Apart of participating in divine services, they are supposed to behave appropriately and help in all tasks performed by the monks. With the development of cenobitic life, the reception of guests becomes a standard part of monastic life. Any monk or nun who would dare to say something against it, it was simply told to leave the monastery. Saint Basil ranks hospitality as a monastic priority. Although he does know that guests who demanded better accommodations, richer food, or any special treatment should be dismissed as quickly as the monk who refused to share his simple life with guests. The virtue of hospitality as part of the love of Christ was especially important to Saint Bridget, abbess of Kildare in Ireland. In pre-Christian Ireland, every man was required by secular law to provide hospitality to anyone who asked for it. Saint Bridget took this legal and social obligation of her people and by infusing it with the love of Christ, transformed it into holy rule and a godly art. She established numerous monasteries in Ireland, the most famous of which was the 5th century community at Kildare. These were centers of spiritual and cultural life, of education, as well as important stopping places for travelers. It was not only food, drink, and lodging which Saint Bridget provided for all who needed them, but the blessing of God upon all who came to her. And conversely, it was Christ that she saw in everyone, and in his name she gave hospitality to everybody. Monastic Philoxenia Memory, former spiritual guide of Atopedi Monastery on Mount Athos for many years, appreciated Philoxenia to a great extent and insisted on it. He considered it one of the most delicate tasks of obedience in a synodium, because through it the visitors directly obtained spiritual benefit. What was especially characteristic of him was that regardless of great poverty in which they had often lived during the monastic days, he generously received everybody who wished to obtain spiritual benefit during their stay in the monastery, even if his brethren had no place to sleep since their beds were given to the guests. Here in England, you have the best example of caring for guests, the monastery of St. John the Baptist in Essex. Following the example of the monasteries on Mount Athos on Sundays and holidays, everybody who is present at the Divine Liturgy is invited to stay for a meal afterwards. The adjusted typicon of the monastery gives the people an opportunity to spend the whole day in the monastery by confessing, attending Vespers, listening to talks in English and Greek, thus obtaining lessons for spiritual life and inspiration for the whole of the following week. The founder of the monastery, Saint Sophrony, knew the spiritual hunger of the soul of the Westerns and the atmosphere of their environment all too well. But he was also aware of the responsibility which a monastic oasis had in non-orthodox surroundings. It is for this reason that he insisted on having guests' needs met through philoxenia. Through their actions, monks were supposed to show love and serve their neighbors with humility. He believed these were the preconditions for the burdened contemporary people to open their hearts to contact with God. During the recent pandemic, when the gate of monastery had to be closed to visitors, support was still provided to neighbors in a contemporary manner. Through video links, guests were hosted at the table of love and fed with the Christ word. This is how this monastery once again confirmed the truth that there will always be ways to treat one's neighbors with love. At the very beginning, it should be said that philoxenia is one of the ways to effectively practice the evangelical commandment regarding love for our neighbors. Just as love is the greatest of all virtues according to St. Paul the Apostle, in monastic teachings and tradition, philoxenia is often ranked more important than other feats. The place and significance of philoxenia in monastic life is most clearly depicted through the fact that, despite the firmly established monastic rules defining the manner and the measure of fasting, prayer, endeavor, and life in general, numerous examples are found in the writings of the Holy Fathers where philoxenia is set about the personal or monastic rule of fasting and prayer. One of the examples is the following. A brother came to a certain solitary, and when he was going away from him, he said, "Forgive me, Father, for I have made you break your rule." But he replied, My rule is to receive you with hospitality and send you on your way in peace. Venerable Isaac the Syrian wrote, when you give, be generous and with a smile on your face, and provide for your neighbors even more than they have asked for. For thus they may attract the unworthy to the goodness, since the soul through body is quickly brought to fear from God. The same could be said about Philoxenia, whose transfiguring effect on the one of the whom it was expressed never fails, since it was sown as a spiritual seed into their soul. It is from this seed that, with God's help, the wish to correct ourselves grows as well as becoming closer to God. In order to understand how all this happens, we shall present some thoughts of His Eminence Metropolitan Callistos of Theoclea, of blessed memory, former president of the Friends of Mount Athos, to whom this conference is dedicated. In his study, entitled Monastic Life, the Sacrament of Love, in the chapter referring to spiritual fatherhood, hospitality and prayer, he knows that, according to the tradition of Saint Pachomius, monks are to serve society in direct manner. In the opinion of the Metropolitan, a monk does the greatest possible favor to the world through his spiritual struggle, in which the most important weapon is prayer. He attaches equal importance to spiritual fatherhood, which is also an important means of enabling monastic to serve society, since the elders, sanctified in grace as spiritual guides, may have an effect on the transformation of one's life. What is also very interesting is the Metropolitan's pointing to the possibility that philoxenia, as a Christian virtue, may in a sense replace the institution of spiritual father. The monastic brotherhoods that do not have a blessed elder among them may heal and lead their neighbors by accepting them as guests for a while and keep them in the spiritual embrace of Christian and monastic closeness and brotherly love. Spouses who do spend some time as pilgrims and guests in monastic environment may return to their domestic hearts and everyday work with new hope and new mutual and inner unity after participates in monks' prayer and work. Prayer and work normally make the circle of monastic life, bounded with the sound of bells and striking of a salmon drum. In this case of hosting, the whole monastery acts as an elder, as a spiritual father. Thus, every monastery acts like yeast for the whole society by forming an oasis of apostolic brotherhood in a world governed by loneliness and in which hostility among people is growing frantically. It is important to keep this in mind, since it's not just monks and nuns who provide philoxenia that have spiritual gain from it, but it also benefits pilgrims, as confirmed by the centuries-old experience of our Church. While most Orthodox pilgrims visit monasteries with an already established idea of what spiritual benefit to expect, there are many others that come out of curiosity or some other reason. Nevertheless, even as such, they are not deprived of spiritual benefit. As we have already stated, hospitality is an integral part of the monastic tasks of obedience and spiritual exploits. Yet, in order for these tasks to deliver spiritual benefits, to help them thrive spiritually, they must be performed in a proper way. At the same time, it means that not only can they fail to bring about spiritual benefits, but that they can be even harmful for us as well, unless they are performed properly. Despite having proved that philoxenia is amongst the most valuable virtues of monastic life, we often encounter certain rules that limit monastic hospitality. In that, they invite restraint and caution. The latter being a session for preserving the salt of monastic life, not conflicting in any sense with the evangelical teaching of caring about our fellows. A monastic life implies the most attentive vigilance over oneself, even that a seemingly inconspicuous feature of the outer world seen from the perspective of someone not involved in monastic life, may present the greatest of temptations, and ultimately the fail itself. Having said that, we believe that the need to preserve unique monastic spirit with every effort possible, and stay always watchful in order to retain its specific ethos, shaped over centuries, is becoming clearer and clearer. The utmost fairness in this respect is found in one of the oldest monastic statues, that of Saint Pachomius the Great, which even demanded that visitors altogether be banned from being received on the premises of a monastery unless they are priests or monks. There were special courts intended for them, to offer them due hospitality. The saint would not deviate from these rules, even when confronted with reproaches, being firmly convinced that there was nothing more important than keeping the souls of brethren away from all sorts of temptation. Similar sensitivity, as expressed by ancient spiritual teachers in Orthodox monastic tradition, was shown by our contemporary Venerable Paisios the Atonite in his epistles meant for those preparing for monastic life. He deals in detail with the issues and challenges to be considered upon joining a monastic community. In this respect, he provides some particular directions about what a novice should do with a view to starting successfully in monastic life. When receiving guests is concerned, he warns them of the following. One of the most serious problems that one should, as a novice, take care of is the issue of guests. Not only should you avoid them at all costs, but you should ask an elder to provide a cell for you as distant from the guest house as possible, in order for you to forget all about the world and worldly affairs. St. Paisios also knows that beginners are like a camera. They imprint in their memory every image they see, so he advises them to stay as far as possible from guests until they have forgotten everything that is worldly, and until the world inside them changes through a spiritual transfiguration of divine love, which will give them strength to free themselves from bad impressions and thoughts. In the end, the purpose of these directions is quite clear: distancing from visitors as residents of the world, who share its characteristics both consciously and unconsciously, in a necessary prerequisite for cleansing the mind of a monk, for which a monk strives with his asceticism, so that he may reach the state of pure prayer and communion with God.
Now we will hear about hospitality on Mount Athos.
In the Athonite tradition, the great importance is attached to the practice of hospitality and philoxenia as a virtue, just as is the monastic tradition in general. How much philoxenia is appreciated in the consciousness of the Archimandrite monks is provided by the fact that during the divine service on the feast of the Holy Fathers of Mount Athos, celebrated every year on the second Sunday after Pentecost, among all other monastic efforts and virtues of these venerable men, such as fasting, prayer, vigil, confession, martyrdom, pastoral and episcopal service, the virtue of philoxenia stands out as a special one. Even though Mount Athos is isolated from the rest of the world, numerous pilgrims visit its monasteries and skeets during the whole year. It is full of visitors who have the opportunity to be spiritually refreshed by monks. Part of Athonite philoxenia is that the monasteries receive all men regardless of faith or nationality. The Athonite monks open the door to all, receive visitors warmly, and talk to them with kindness. This feature is present not only in the monastic cenobium, but is practiced by hermits and sub-monks. In spite of great poverty in which they often live, they are hospitable to everyone, pleasant and approachable, seeing every man as a unique person. They interrupt their rest and even their prayers to look after their fellow men. In their poverty, fathers share with visitors all they have, and what is more important, they offer spiritual food such as comfort and advice. The monastic community of Mount Athos, spiritual by its nature and existence, formed and organized itself for more than 10 centuries as a special community with self-administrative status. The uniqueness of its administration, as well as the rules of internal and external organization of monastic life, are prescribed by the Typica of Mount Athos. The provisions of the Typica aim to enable the monks to fulfill their mission as well as possible. Life in Christ equal in the spiritual, administrative, and working spheres. Hence, every expression of monastic life, both spiritual and material, should be directed toward this goal. The same could be said about the hospitality, to which the monks of Mount Athos are especially inclined and dedicated. For example, in the Typicon called Short Typicon of the St. John Chrysostomos Monastery in the Holy Mountain, written at the beginning of the 20th century for the needs of the Brotherhood of the Hilandar Kellyan of St. John Chrysostomos, in the chapter Pilgrims of our Brotherhood, among other things, the following is said: "It is our custom to welcome our brothers and worshippers of the Holy Mountain, who ride by sea to the port of Daphne. Everybody is to be accommodated in our family. Their rooms are to be kept clean and exemplary. Should they wish for a cup of tea or something to eat in their guest room, the superior is to be immediately informed and then act accordingly. On their departure, the pilgrims are to be given a present as a form of blessing by the superior himself or by the monastery steward. When the pilgrims leave Mount Athos, their names are to be mentioned during divine services. Guest apartments are to be cleaned, scrubbed, bed sheets washed, as well as chairs, tables, walls, floors, and dews made ready for the new guests." After the description of such attention towards pilgrims, the Typicon further explains the manner of providing charity, where the primary idea is that members of Brotherhood, supported by the contributions of generous benefactors, are to provide charity to those in need. Everybody is to be given bread and some money, so we could receive the Lord's gift as well. Metropolitan Callistos, of blessed memory, to get back to some of his Britain legacy, speaks about Atonit Philoxenia from the perspective of monastic love for neighbors. "I remember Father Gabriel, the abbot of the Adherents Monastery in Mount Athos, who told me how monks were wrong when complaining about having many visitors. Guests are not a burden, but a privilege, he used to say to me. He believed that monastery income, no matter how big it is, should be divided in 3 parts. 1 part for maintaining the buildings, 1 for food and clothes for the monks, and the 3rd for the needs of the visitors. In that way, the circle of monastic love is never closed, because there is always place for strangers, passers-by and exiles. Christ said, "Inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me." When discussing Philoxenia within the ancient tradition of Mount Athos, it has to be stressed that above all, it's based on the large number of miracles that had occurred through history, which were understood by the monks of Mount Athos as unequivocal declarations of God's will regarding the significance of Philoxenia. And we know that accordance with God's will is the very essence of monasticism. At the end of the 19th century, the abbot of Russian monastery on Mount Athos, Elder Jerome, said the following in his legacy on the miracle of God's mercy, which enabled his brotherhood to help the poor during a period of great scarcity. "You are aware how long has the Lord tempted our monks with great scarcity, as well as serious debts, since it was not until the Crimean War that they were able to provide charity to the poor. However, when our monks decided to share, with absolute renunciation, the last crumbs of their bread with the poor, abundant charity from all over Russia started coming into St. Panteleimon Monastery. With that kind of support in those times of destitution, monks had no need to save up, they provided support to many poor. Holy Mother of God, the abbess of the whole of Mount Athos, has clearly shown through several miraculous apparitions that it is her wish for the monks of Mount Athos to be hospitable. We should mention the miraculous apparition of the Holy Mother of God from the beginning of the 20th century in the Russian monastery of St. Panteleimon on Mount Athos. This monastery has long cherished the tradition of providing charity to poor monks, homeless people, strangers, and all the residents of Mount Athos in need, even when the monastery itself suffered great scarcity. A monk whose obedience was to be a photographer took photos of such an event. In the black and white photograph, which was developed afterwards, in addition to the poor waiting in line with a few monks, a figure of a poorly dressed woman appeared. She was humbly holding a piece of bread, which she had just received as charity. Monks realized that it was the Holy Mother of God herself, who through her apparition showed that she observed the charity provided for others, as if it was given to her. Nowadays, this photograph is enlarged and set upon the wall of the monastery, while in the place where the Mother of God appeared, there is an incorruptible water spring. Our turbulent times bring new spiritual challenges for the souls of everyone. These challenges are experienced even in the monastic communities of the Holy Mountain, which, even though detached, are not entirely separated from the world. One of these challenges, connected to our current theme and unparalleled in our history, is the great number of pilgrims who daily visit the garden of the Most Holy Theotokos. Entry to the Holy Mountain has been greatly simplified, and the entry permit, or the Diamantrinium, is obtained without much difficulty. Besides this, the improved roadways and various transportation options have greatly reduced the time spent traveling to the Holy Mountain, and thereby also contribute to the current situation. It is important to understand that the present high frequency of visitors has the potential to endanger the monks' attentiveness and quite often the monastic typica. The pastoral and missionary work provided to newly arrived visitors becomes a priority for the spiritual fathers, and consequently they have less time for the spiritual guidance of their own brotherhoods. In the light of this difficulty, it is important to understand that contemporary man has a genuine need for the Holy Mountain. Many with deep trust turn to the monastic republic in order to experience and witness the level of devotion which these monastic communities possess in service to God, and service toward the salvation of souls, which is continued for all of millennia. Likewise, many are impressed by the historical and cultural wealth, which maintains an altogether unique place in Christian Byzantine heritage. For visitors, Mount Athos is a sort of time capsule in which they can, at least for a moment, live some other kind of life, far away from the restlessness and turmoil of the modern world. It is important to find a proper measure in order to offer, in our current times, traditional Athonite hospitality, and also to limit the number of pilgrims, which is essential to maintaining the genuine monastic life on the Holy Mountain. If this balance is disturbed in a very short time, the monastic community on Athos will become incapable of living the authentic monastic life. Paradoxically, the gradual disappearance of Athonite monastic life would prevent the pilgrim from finding what he yearns for, the authentic experience of the Church and life according to the evangelical commandments experienced through the monastic struggle, all of which has been undisturbed and protected throughout its 1,000-year history. In order for the monastic communities of Athos to avoid failing to face these modern challenges, and in order to provide a proper solution, a great deal of spiritual wisdom and faith is needed. Recently, the Holy Mountain, along with the whole world, was faced with the great crisis caused by epidemics of COVID and following involuntarily the recommendation of respective authorities of the Hellenic Republic, he had been forced to completely close her borders for pilgrims. This period of isolation offered the fathers an opportunity to review the reality and to renew their traditional way of life, treasured for centuries. Unexpectedly, the fathers were given the opportunity to turn towards their original calling, communal worship, hesychia, and praying for the salvation of the whole world, particularly in a moment when such prayer was most needed. Currently, Mount Athos is again open for pilgrims, albeit with certain restrictions. Only in firm faith, steadfastness in divine services, and unshaken spiritual struggle can Mount Athos overcome all temptations, including those of a contemporary nature. Preserving these values, the Holy Mountain will continue to be a place of salvation for all those who have left the world in order to embrace God, as well as a lighthouse of salvation for all Orthodox Christians and all who are spiritually enlightened.
And now it's time to hear about hospitality in our Hilandar Monastery.
For more than 8 centuries now, the Holy Monastery of Hilandar has been a place of God-seeking souls, mainly from Serbian-speaking countries, who think of themselves as spiritual children of Venerable Simon the Mere, Steeming and Saint Sava. Also, Hilandar has always nurtured an awareness of the fact that the monastic order, as well as internal spiritual disposition of the monastic community, can only have as their prototype what has been prescribed by fathers in the Orthodox Church and teachers of monastic life. At the same time, Hilandar, as integral part of the monastic community of Mount Athos, is governed by the principles of the Athenian tradition as well. All this implies that our monastery has always dedicated much attention to hospitality and philoxenia. Saint Sava, the first Serbian archbishop and founder of the Hilandar Brotherhood, composed a typicon that served as the basis for the rules of its daily life. Consulting for the most part the typicon of the Byzantine monastery of Theotokos Evergetis, as well as homilies of Venerable Theodore the Student. In Hilandar's typicon, chapter 38, entitled Concerning Giving to the Brothers at the Gate, Saint Sava left detailed instructions on providing hospitality and giving aims to the needy. What shall be said? You should treasure very much, for it greatly multiplies the benefit and salvation for you. And what is that? It is distribution at the gate and the comforting and watching over strangers and the weak, for the sake of whom we have built the hospice, begging the sight from some devout Christian. There we will comfort strangers and provide whatever care we can to those that are sick and confined to bed. What is more, the philanthropy of Saint Sava goes beyond care for the living, and his typicon in the same chapter provides us with detailed instructions on how to properly organize burial ceremonies for strangers. And the dead need to be buried. A burial place for strangers is built for them. This is not surprising, for he believes that it is more important to take care of the souls of strangers than their bodies. In his words, so that you should not, by providing them with anything lesser than that, forget what is better and more necessary to be done. In addition, he commands that all the necessary prayers should be said for the deceased, as if he had been a member of our community. Saint Sava concludes with the following words: For we shall not bid farewell to anyone without attending to their spiritual needs. That is either for the living or for the one that, according to God's will, has found his final rest with us. In some of the previous accounts featuring the concepts of philoxenia and monastic heritage in general, some of the mentioned examples revealed the somewhat superior position of these spiritual in comparison to others. We believe that the attitude of St. Sava is the same, and the confirmation in this regard can be found in chapter 29 of his Typicon, where he first commands that no member of the community, the abbot included, shall prepare a special meal for himself, but all are to eat at a common table, and only to make an exception in case of hospitality. He, as a great ascetic, has even underlined the importance of this command by calling the Lord himself and the Holy Mother of God to be his witness in this matter. His exact words being, "And I also command you the following, before our Lord and Holy Mother of God, our Sovereign Lady." The text then says that the strict command can be bypassed in case of illness, which is perfectly reasonable, but he maintains that hospitality is yet another circumstance when the aforementioned command can be altered. By paying respect to the heritage of its founder and heavenly patron, Hilandar has tried to maintain the virtue of hospitality through 8 centuries of its existence. For the purpose of this narrative, we consider that the most appropriate examples will be taken from some more recent elders of the monastery. One of them is Elder Nicanos, Epitropos and spiritual father of Hilandar, who was the protos of Mount Athos in 1963, when the millennial anniversary of this unique monastic republic was celebrated. He was also famous for his devotion to hospitality. He would welcome visitors from all over the world with love and a brotherly hug, regardless of their religion, ethnic or political designation. "We are all brothers in Christ and should act accordingly," he maintained. When visitors from Serbia arrived at the monastery, Elder Nicanos would greet them at the gate, together with his fellow brothers, warmly saying, "God bless you all. Welcome, my children. It was high time." He would justify the Hilandar hospitality by claiming, "We are not concerned with the Eurasian perspective visit. Saint Sava provided for us to that there is enough of everything, both for the community and for our guests. The place frequented by people where one can feel embraced by the spiritual world is a blessed place." In another testimony of Elder Nicanor's spiritual philoxenia, he taught that by welcoming visitors with love, one actually welcomes the Lord himself. This is the account of an event as the elder perceived it. "Once there was a visitor to our monastery with whom I had no opportunity of conversing until the end of the day. In the evening, before I began my prayer roll, I heard an internal voice saying to me, 'Here I am, I have come to your monastery, and you found no time for me.' The elder took this address as if coming from the monastery, and the elder took this address as if coming from the Lord himself, and that is why he perceived it as a reproach, indicating that by failing to find time for this pilgrim, he failed to show the love for Christ himself." We should also mention the missionary role of Hilandar Monastery, which is closely related to the concept of philoxenia, with mutual mergings in some respects. One of the most respected Hilandar monks of the last century, Elder Methodios, was particularly devoted to this role, which is reflected in his words. "Hilandar has an emphasized missionary role. Our people from Serbia, upon their visits, are not interested only in icons on the walls and the contents of our treasury. They are equally interested in hearing advice on how to continue their lives in relation to the church and the people. Thus, Hilandar assumes yet another dimension that requires a lot of strength and preparation. So, according to Elder Mitrophanos, the monks welcoming visitors have a pronounced missionary role, which spreads its influence on the internal transfiguration of the visitor as well. In his own words, "Each and every word of ours should radiate spiritual warmth and a constant wish that the one who leaves the monastery should depart from his thoughts pure and with his views established, that he should take with him some solution. I am going to think in another way. I am going to act in another way." An injustice would be done to Elder Mitrophanos should one of his spiritual pearls by which he enriched the knowledge of younger monks remain unmentioned. The story goes that we, younger monks, being novices and inexperienced in monastic life, found the multitude of visitors at the end of the 20th century difficult to cope with, since we were in the middle of preparations for our jubilee, 8 centuries of the monastery of Hilandar. At that time, Elder Mitrofanus was the first epitropos, so we naturally turned to him with our complaints. His reply was, "My children, many of those who come as tourists might return as pilgrims." Some might retort, that may be an attractive theory, but we are not sure that it is supported by daily routines of your monastery, since you do not welcome all those who express the wish to be welcomed, and certain limitations are to be introduced. Each form of monastic asceticism must be performed with adequate measure, in accordance with the powers of those who strive for that goal. If that is ignored, instead of gaining any benefit, one might suffer spiritual damage. Much like the accounts of fasting, of vigil, or of any other aspect of asceticism which are naturally beneficial for monks. Providing that a proper measure is applied, if monks perform exploits beyond their measure, spiritual struggle will certainly not be useful for their souls. The same goes for hospitality. Everything that has been said so far unambiguously shows that philoxenia cannot be expressed in figures, but certain statistical data may reveal the scale of the measure in question, proving how one monastic community can perform these feat. To be specific, we would mention that prior to the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, Hilandar used to receive between 15,000 and 17,000 visitors a year. The majority, of course, are pilgrims from areas where serfs live. However, they do not all come with the same inner disposition. Professor Vlada Jankovic, former ambassador to the United Kingdom and one of Prince of Mount Athos' patrons, who has been a friend and dear guest of the monastery for several decades, wrote about what they get during their stay at our monastery. A stay in Hilandar calms and strengthens people regardless of age, social position, education, or experience. The complex creation of famous musicians, painters, writers, just like the touchingly simple, poorly spelled entries in the monastery book of impressions, testify to this. In a way, the walls of Hilandar are like a viewpoint from which a completely new perspective opens on the spiritual realm, but also on one's own life performance. It is a place of re-examination and reckoning, an island outside the mainstream of everyday reality, where a person creates an intimate balance sheet, gathering oneself for a moment and orienting oneself for the remaining part of the journey. At this point, there may be a voice commenting, with a tinge of disbelief. It is possible that Mr. Jankovic, as a professor of literature, has, with his inspiring words, presented things as being far more sublime than they actually are. If someone were to ask me, Father Abbot, we would like to know about the impressions of a rural countryman from Serbia and his encounter with Hilandar. Could you please answer this question? My answer would be yes, of course. On one occasion, at the time when I was the epitropos, a journalist from Serbia visited Hilandar and asked me for a blessing to browse through the books of impressions in the monastery, as he wanted to make a collection of the most inspiring accounts and publish it subsequently as a book. Every day he would go through these accounts, the decades-long yield, in a rather enthusiastic way. He sincerely welcomed those that featured profound emotions, but he was equally disappointed by the observation of famous Serbs, intellectuals, which in his opinion were unbecoming of their reputation. Until one day he stormed out of the room, very excited, and asked me to join him, so that he could read to me a piece of writing by a common Serbian farmer. Milica was the name of the author of this account, a common name in the Serbian countryside. One should bear in mind the fact that in the mid-90s, It would have been financially extremely difficult for someone like Miroslav to head for Greece and subsequently Mount Athos. In order to obtain funds for such a journey, he would have been forced to sell some of his products. This is what made the journalist so excited about this particular account. I hear from my fellow villagers, Miroslav, are you crazy? Why would you want to visit Hilandar again? You have been to that place 15 times at least. And my answer is, I sell a car and I am off to Hilandar for the 16th time.
And so, on behalf of Hilandar Brotherhood and in my own name, I thank you for the opportunity to address you as well as for your attention.
Thank you. I would like to thank you both, Father Robert and Philip, for his help. Philip is going to be, hopefully, God's help, professor at Cambridge University, and he's finishing his PhD here. We have enough time for questions, but before we started with questions, Father Abbot asked me to invite Dr. Speak and Father Douglas, and Father Abbot would like to present him with a gift. It's a coin, silver coin actually, produced by decision of the Secret Council of Elders of the Holy Imperial Serbian Lavra of Hilandar, and with the blessing of the Abbot, the very venerable Archimandrite Methodios, on the occasion of the 700th anniversary of the death of the Hilandar Ktitor, Saint King Milutin, in monastic known as monk Theoctist, in limited numbers of 100 copies. Dr. Speak and Father Douglas, please proceed.
As we know, after the fire of our monastery, the Friends of Montatos helps us several times, and we have this opportunity to give you this silver coin.
That's okay. And I have here a very gracious letter that came to me from you, formally to the Friends of Mount Athos, to thank you all for your generosity and vision and support of the monastery through good days and bad, and now better. And this is just a small gift so that you know something of our faith in this country from before the schism, so you can use it with profit. And it's a series of prayers and readings from the Anglo-Saxon Church, which I think will give you a vision of how our ancestors related to our Lord, His Holy Mother, and the saints.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for your gracious kindness.
Thank you very much.
As you can see, Father Robert is absolutely able to speak and understand English, but because of the language barrier, both of us are obviously not native speakers. We will ask Philip again to translate your questions, and please ask if you have any questions regarding the Abbot's lecture.
Thank you, England, for a wonderful talk, and thank you. I wanted to say your English is near perfect, so I didn't really understand why you think your English isn't perfect. It was really good. You mentioned a lot about hospitality. The whole talk was about hospitality, and as somebody who has received your hospitality 7 times since 2019, thank you. I can attest to the fact that it's absolutely wonderful. And I don't just mean that to be polite, I mean that every single aspect of the monastery is impeccable. It's clean. It's tended. The rooms are just cared for with love. And my question is, how do you do that? How does every single person in the monastery look so motivated and so focused on their job? And it doesn't matter how lowly the job is, they all seem to be very happy to do the job. How do you do that?
Yes, I understand the question, but I think I cannot answer in English. Treba reći da sve što se dešava u manastiru, da je to uz pomoć blagodati Božije.
Everything that happens in the monastery is by the blessing of her.
By divine grace.
Louder. Can you speak louder?
Also, the Father Abbot said that everything that happens in the monastery happens by the help of His grace.
Yes, with God's divine grace and blessing.
A posebno kada se radi o opštežiću, onda svaki monah dobije još veću snagu, jer on to ne radi sam za sebe, nego svakoga podržava u poslu. Dakle, svi rade kao jedna zajednica, kao jedno telo.
And in Sinopian community of the monks, it's not that it's only provided by his own devotees, of all monks together.
Kao što sveti apostol Pavle zajednicu u crkvi opisuje kao svako kao jedan deo tela, neko je glava, neko su ruke, neko noge, tako isto i u manastiru, isto tako činimo jedno telo. I samo u takvoj jednoj zajednici možemo da učinimo velika dela.
As the Saint Paul said, that the church is as a body, and everywhere some people are hands, some people are legs. It's also in the monastery. Each of the monks has its own part in community and body of the monastery.
Tako da možete da mi verujete, ako bi nekoga od nas izdvojili iz te zajednice, niko ne bi bio sposoban za nešto posebno, ali kada smo svi zajedno, onda možemo da budemo sposobni.
So you can believe me that if you take one part of our community outside, he will not be able to do in the same way as the community as a whole.
Any other questions?
This is just an observation. It's not a question, but it's in support of what Chris has just said. I will never forget my visit to Hilandar in April 2004, and the date is significant because the previous month half of the monastery had burned down and the place was in ruins, and I think the fathers were in shock. I came with another father from Vatapedi, actually his son, and we thought probably we should have to sleep in the church because there wouldn't be enough programs. But not a bit of it. We were found, I think, a room each to ourselves, and we were given wonderful hospitality and superb food. And it was unbelievable in the circumstances. It's been a great joy since then to watch the reconstruction of the monastery. And in particular, in June of this year, just 4 months ago, I was there, and it was marvelous to see the reconstruction more or less complete. So I congratulate you on that. It's been a wonderful experience for us to observe, and in our small way, to try to contribute to that restoration.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words and help as well. It's a gentleman in the first row.
All pilgrims are very grateful for the monastic hospitality on the Holy Mountain, and we try to observe the rules. But there may be some things which we do unknowingly which might offend. And are there any particular ones which you would like to mention, particularly to somebody who is not Orthodox?
Kao što sam rekao, ovo je skraćena verzija mog teksta, a u ovoj dugoj baš ima odgovor na to pitanje.
As I mentioned in the beginning, in the this is shorter version of his father Abbott's talk. So in the longer version, there your question is addressed.
A taj odgovor se nalazi u jednoj pouci, sada već blaženo počivšeg starca Jefrema u Filotejskoj, koji je bio u Arizoni na kraju svog života. Taj odgovor se nalazi u jednoj pouci od starca Jefrema, Filotejskog, koji je bio poslije u Monastiku u Arizoni.
And the answer to your question is actually a saying of one of the father Jefrem, who was in Arizona in the United.
On govori o nekim pravilima, ima napisano što su novi manastiri, on ih je osnovao tamo u Arizoni, i on govori o pravilima kako treba da bude, kako treba da se ponašaju poklonici.
So these are new monasteries in the United States, and there he actually mentions how the pilgrims should behave on the premises of monastery.
Ali na kraju on kaže da to nikako ne sme da bude prva stvar o kojoj monasi razmišljaju.
In the end, it should not be the first thing about which monks should think about.
On kaže, ako prvo govorite ljudima, ovdje smeš da stojiš, ovdje ne smeš, ovdje smeš da ideš, ovdje ne smeš, a ako to postavimo kao glavnu stvar, onda smo promašili cilj. Pravi cilj je ljubav prema gostima.
He says, if the first thing that you mention to pilgrims, oh, you can't stand here, you can stand here, and so on, then we miss the point, and the point is the love.
Tako da, ako Gospodin dođe kod nas, da se ne plaši da će nešto pogrešiti, mi ćemo se potruditi da ga primimo sa ljubavnom.
So the gentleman should not be afraid to come to the monastery. He'll be accepted with love. He shouldn't be guided through any rules.
Is there any questions? Then, Father Abbot, thank you very much. Thank you all for your patience. Thank you for his help. And we will now, I think it now schedule is Vespers in the parish church. It should be, if I understand, in Orthodox tradition. Thank you very much, and God bless you all.